Greetings, folks, and welcome to the live launch party for Shadow Over Doggerland, which is book one in the North Sea trilogy. Yes, I'm going to be joined by three of my fellow scribes this evening. I'll be joined by Robert Poyton, Gavin Chappell, and Chris McAuley. And we're going to be doing a few readings and the usual sort of round table thingy-bobs. And so if you have any questions for the authors, get them down in the comments section. There should be a link there somewhere where you can pick up the book. It's the My Book 2 / Shadow Over Doggerland. It should be there. Yes, it looks like it is. Everything's working, which makes a change. That's the link under there, scrolling on the bottom of the screen. Right, yes, Shadow Over Doggerland. It's a project that we've been working on for a while. Myself and Christopher Mary Holtman from Nordic Press, we've been talking about doing one set in Britain, a mythos thing, and incorporating like music and things like this. And we were doing a launch event. I was doing a launch event for their Worlds Collide anthology, which was all mashups. And I'd done a mashup of The Wind in the Willows and Cthulhu, called The Madness in the Willows. And when we were doing the questions, one of the authors, I think it was a comment, it was actually one of the people who's involved in the Shadow Over Doggerland, E.L. Giles. Eric actually said, let's, Valhalla, Vikings and Cthulhu. So when we were talking about it, it was kind of like, oh yeah, well, this could be a good trilogy. So from there, we had to try and think of a first book. And Chris had just watched a documentary about Doggerland. And it was like, right, yeah, let's do it. And so we sort of threw it out to a bunch of people and people ran with it. And I'm really happy with the results. It's come out a lot better than I could have ever imagined, because you have this worry with these kind of projects especially when you're doing something like Doggerland, we don't know that much about it, right? And also you don't want to fall into caveman trappings. You don't want a bunch of peoples called her walking around saying ugh and waving clubs at Shoggoth. So it would be quite funny. I don't think you could keep it up for like 15 stories or however. But anyway, yeah, I'm really pleased and proud of how it's come out. So I'm going to bring on my first guest of the evening, somebody who's probably going to be no stranger to people who's tuned into these before. He's my co-host on the Innsmouth Book Club podcast and Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast, Mr. Robert Poyton. Greetings, sir.
Hey, mate. How you going? Hey, everyone.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Yes, all right. All right, thank you. Still a bit croaky in the throat, which is not an Innsmouth condition. There's been some rumours going around, but I just want
I can vouch. We've checked him for scales. He's all right. We've had him in the back room of my bookshop in Innsmouth and had a look. Now, you were one of the few people involved in this who was already aware of Doggerland, because you'd incorporated it in one of your own works.
I've done its trilogy, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was 3 novellas set in modern times in England, but a certain amount of the action, well, the whole start of it, as the name might suggest, takes place in and around Dunwich on the East Coast. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the original Dunwich in England, which is very famous for being the city that fell into the sea. In the Middle Ages, it was the second biggest city in England, second only to London, very important for trade. And there were 2 huge storms that basically submerged most of the town under the sea. And since then, of course, the North Sea has been encroaching on the land. And there's the old legend about at night when there's storms going on, you can hear the bells of the old church ringing. It's a great place to visit if anyone's in that area. Really atmospheric place to visit.
Isn't that also where they filmed the 60s Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You?
Yes,
M.R. James adaptation. That was that beach, wasn't it?
The beach, and part of it is there when he's up looking at the gravestones. That's up on the cliff as well. Though there's only one gravestone left now. In fact, the one that's in the film is the only one that's left, and that's now. Yeah, it's right on the edge of the cliff now. You can't actually get to it. They've fenced it all off.
Yeah. That's excellent. Yeah. So, what was your initial thoughts when I sort of put this to you?
Brilliant, because I thought I'd say, I researched it for my book. So part of the book, the setting goes back centuries to how certain, well, deep ones, let's call them what they are, yeah, and the kind of background history to it. And Doggerland formed a big part of that. So, and it's kind of, I suppose it's our Atlantis, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
The idea, though, it's factual that this landmass spread from here all the way across to Norway. I mean, that's a huge amount of land. And you sort of think a lot of that stuff now, archaeologically speaking, we can't access because it's at the bottom of the sea. You know, you sort of wonder what's down there, really.
Yeah, definitely. And the things that we have found that we do know about are the sort of things that we incorporated into it, like the antler headdresses. I thought that's a very evocative image, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
The old big sort of thing, you know.
Yeah. But I also like what you said about the caveman thing, because I've a bit of a sort of thing with that, where our ancestors are stereotypes as these sort of, like you say, hit on the head with, you know. I mean, anyone who has to hunt for a living and live in those sort of conditions with absolutely no amenities whatsoever, you've got to be pretty smart and swithed on to survive in that, you know. So
absolutely.
I'm sticking up for the cavemen here.
Caveman's rights. Yeah. Nice one. Yeah. So would you like to introduce your story and give us a bit of a reading? And I'll come back in a minute. So
the story is called The Temple of the Toad. And I'm just going to go from the start of it, so I don't really need to set anything up. But it's basically set on the coast, and a warrior has been sent to investigate reports of strange creatures that have been seen coming out of the sea and attacking the local fishing villages. So, the Temple of the Toad. The creatures attacked again last night. The woman's voice brought Tal's head around, away from his scanning of the hazy horizon ahead. Again, he asked, drawing the woolen cloak aside to place a hand on the axe at his hip. The woman stopped and nodded, two small children clinging to her skirts. Again, we've heard stories of the elders, we thought them mere tales, but now we have seen them 3 times this past moon. She brushed back the hair that blew across her pinched-cheeked face and scowled, gesturing back across the marshes. She was one of a group of fisherfolk walking the narrow track that led away from the coast to join up with the larger pathway inland. And the warriors, Tal growled. Taken with a dozen of our people, a flicker of pain across her face. Including your man, she nodded. He fought, we all fought, but what mortal can stand against such devils? Tal shrugged. Perhaps we shall find out. She took in his resolute mien, the scarred forearms, the lean dark face framed by tangled black hair that fell to broad shoulders. At almost 6 feet tall, he towered over the fisherfolk, obviously a fighting man. An older woman called, "Come, Eager, tarry no more, we must be far gone by sundown." The woman resumed her trudging, and Tal turned again to the low rise ahead and the pearly mist that gently spilled over it. By the time he crested the ridge, the refugees had already vanished from sight. Pausing, he peered ahead. Visibility was poor here at the best of times, despite the open flatlands that characterized this part of the coast. That was largely due to the clinging sea frets that rolled in from the cold brown ocean, whose leaden waves lapped dully upon the shingle shore. That sound came to his ears now, the eternal whisper of the sea, a whisper that spoke of mystery and the terrors of the deep. Men of lore spoke of the old race, those who came before, devils from the sea, who might one day rise to reclaim their birthright. Many scoffed at such nonsense or used the stories to scare their children into good behaviour. Yet those who scoffed, Tal grimly noted, dwelt on hilltop homesteads protected by palisades far from the lapping waves. He strode through the abandoned huts until his feet crunched on loose pebbles. The fog had lifted a little, though there was nothing to see other than the listless waves ahead, the beach stretching into the distance on each side. Then a movement off a ways to his right. Tal strode towards the figure of a man who glanced up at his noisome approach. An aged fisherman sat beside a small boat outside a hut, his weathered brown skin even darker than Tal's, twisted fingers repairing a net. He grunted and continued his work. You stayed where the others have left? The elder shrugged. Leave to go where? He waved a gnarled hand at the sea. This is my place. This is my life. What else do I know? And the sea creatures? I live here alone, out on the edge of the village. They've no interest in me. Tal ran a hand over the edge of the boat. A simple craft, but well enough made. And those they took? Ah, so that's what you are here for, to rescue the taken? It is a task assigned me. Besides, there are those of my kin amongst them. Kin, you say? And what if you are too late? What if they are already gone? Then rescue becomes revenge. Tal curled his fists. The old man gave a wheezing laugh and spat into the shingle. Revenge won't fill your belly, boy. It won't keep you warm at night. He paused, pain flashing across his lined face. And it won't bring them back. So that's how the story is set up.
Nice. Excellent, sir. Yeah, very good. Yeah, we should probably point out that we mentioned on the previous launch party we did about Feast of Fools that we've been trying to outdo each other with Smithian language. And when you sent me your story, I was like, "Oh, that's a good one."
Yeah, so we're trying to get a few in where we can, aren't we? Yeah.
Oh,
trouble is then sometimes you have to read them out, which is always a challenge.
yeah, exactly. Oh God, yeah, don't we know that? We've had a few comments now. Eric says, "Hi, Rob."
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Yep, and he also says, "Well done," and he loves the setup.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes, one thing I liked about all these stories, they were all very atmospheric, which is precisely what I wanted from this. And I think everybody did a really tremendous job of setting the scene. Dawn said, "Good evening, Tim and Rob. Hope you're both okay." Yeah, I'm good. A little bit hungover, but not too bad. Josiah, pleasure as always, sir. And Declan says hello. Yeah. Righty-ho, matey. I'll take you off and I'll bring on my next guest. Oops, sorry, Rob. Cut you off there. Righto. My next guest is Mr. Chris McAuley, the co-creator of the Stokerverse, and has also appeared in publications such as the Musketeers versus Cthulhu. So, yeah, probably going to be a familiar face to some of you as well. Hi, Chris. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing all right, buddy. I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Is that an endoskeleton?
That is an endoskeleton. The previous, just to give people a backstory, so I've worked on the Terminator series as well. And my previous background I tried was quite suitably spooky, but it looked crap. So I thought, well, this is an easier one because the black background it ties in a bit better.
Yeah,
so
excellent. Yeah. Yeah, so what was your initial thoughts when I approached you about the Doggerland project?
It sounded like fun. I teamed up with Claudia Christian for Babylon 5 on this one because we've got a fantasy universe that we set up called Dark Legends, and we thought it would be a good fit to have one of our characters in there. Claudia she's like me, she likes historical fiction, and she loves the whole Lovecraftian stuff that we've worked on together. So it was an easy sell to her to say that, how do you feel about working on this? And she was quite excited about it. She's excited about the North Sea trilogy in general. So it was an easy sell, mate. We thought great.
Yeah, excellent. It's always a bit of a concern when I come up with these ideas that people are actually going to, it's always that worry, isn't there, that somebody's going to go, "That's a stupid idea."
No, I think some of the ideas can be challenging. I don't think you've ever come up with anything that's stupid. I think they're challenging. I mean, the Musketeers one that we did, there's Josiah. I mean, I remember working with him as well. He had a great story on the Musketeers. But, it was like, I remember Claudia said, "Well, how the hell do we do this?" And we came up with something, and it was well received. It's not a comic book, which is in the final stages of being processed, and an RPG game as well. So you just never know, do you? It's one of those things. So I think Shadow Over Doggerland, I think everybody's going to enjoy it. Certainly, I thought it was a great idea in it.
Excellent. Yeah, so are you going to give us a little bit of a reading, mate, if you'd like to introduce the story?
Yeah, I'll give you guys a reading. So, as stated before, it's one of the characters that Claudia and I came up with. We've got sort of a fantasy universe that started off in the Celtic era. So we have this warrior called Kiel, and he's been transported to Doggerland. It's called Soldier of Dread, and I'll start now. Kiel's eyes narrowed as he attempted to look ahead into the underground chamber. His nostrils flared as he took in the scent of the dirt which lay on the ground, and the stink of the creatures that approached him. Grimacing, he threw the torch at his feet and drew the two-handed axe from the rough animal hide sheath on his back. His ears pricked as he heard the start skittering of feet across the floor. In moments, his mighty arm muscles strained as he hefted the axe towards the first of the chitinous beasts that seemed to pour from the darkness of the tomb. They moved with a stooped gait. Their spindle-like legs caused the warrior to remember his recent fights with the giant spiders of the forest. Impossibly sharp teeth snapped at him as he became surrounded by them. In the scant light, Kiel could see that a thick mucus substance drooled from their gibbering mouths. He suppressed a shudder as he watched the dark pink liquid dribble from their swollen lips and onto their full breasts. These things seemed a mixture between spider, crab, and voluptuous woman. The axe glanced off the monster who faced him. It dislodged some of the dark grey plating on its back, but failed to cause the instant death blow that Kiel had hoped for. Kiel felt sharp pain in his back. One of the creatures behind him had used its bladed arms to cut into him. Momentarily distracted, Kiel failed to defend himself from the counterattack mounted by the creature in front. Enraged by the damage Kiel's axe had caused, it slashed into his unprotected stomach. The razor-edged arms tore at the warrior's flesh and caused dark, rich blood to splash across the dirt and stone of the floor. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Kiel rolled away from the creatures. He came to a stop and brought himself into a crouched position. The light of the torch, which he had discarded in favour of the heavy weapon, continued to burn. This afforded him some vision with regard to the enemies who were a few feet away. Watching their forms as they moved across the torchlight, Kiel breathed deeply, remembering the techniques he had learned as a knight in training. Calming his body and controlling the sensation of fear which threatened to overwhelm him. From somewhere deep in his mind came the resonant and strong voice of a swordmaster. The memory stirred him to action once more. "Come on, lad, look for the weakness. Every enemy has one, whether man, beast, or dragon." It took less than a few seconds for Kiel to see the oncoming creatures' protruding leg joints and the soft tissue of their stomachs, as one as the soft tissue of their stomachs as another. Gritting his teeth, Kiel charged from his crouching position. He kept his body low and focused all his strength on his legs and arms. Speed and brutality would win the day here, and he was determined to emerge from this battle victorious. The axe's sharp blade found its mark as it cut into the first creature's leg. Yellow liquid emerged, and Kiel rejoiced as he heard the snap of its brittle joint. The beast let out a horrific mewing sound, its moans of agony goading the others to skitter forward and attack. Through the snapping of their jaws and the slashing of their arms, the warrior rolled and dodged. The creatures attempted to surround him, but now Kiel had their measure. Alternating his attacks, he cut upwards, and the axe shredded the next creature's pale, bloated flesh. The blade punctured the stomach lining and bile duct. Kiel's face soon became a mess, splattered with stinking internal fluids and the remains of ruptured internal organs. Eventually, the creatures began to retreat. They were losing too many of their kind to this invading human. He was unlike the easy prey who had stumbled into the barrow unawares, lost or seeking some mythical treasure. Besides, his body had the look of too much sinew and muscle for there to be much meat anyway. Kiel caught his breath as he listened to the chittering of his foes retreating. The injured ones trailed broken or severed limbs after them. The warrior allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Since he had been brought to this strange place, he had been assailed by all manners of demons and monsters. But still he stood. Still he was undefeated. If he ever returned to his tribe in Ireland, he would have many stories to tell in exchange for meat and comfort. Maybe he could even hire bards to tell his stories in the kingly halls. So there you go.
Excellent, sir. Yeah, your story's always loaded with action and guts and blood. Yeah,
it's a bit of a trademark, I think. Yeah, it's I love those old sword and sorcery epics of the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cheers for that, matey. Right, I'm going to take you off and then bring on my next guest. Just before I do, I should have mentioned at the top, I haven't actually got a copy of the book because Amazon's been rubbish, and it's saying it'll be delivered at some point in the next 2 months or something ridiculous. But it's through the Mythos imprint of Nordic Press, which is similar to my short story collection. So it's going to be very similar looking to that. And this here is the cover. And sums it up nicely, I think. That's a nice moody picture. Like I say, to all you people at home, if you have any questions, we'll be doing some Q&A stuff at the end. Okay, my next guest is another one who's going to be a familiar face. He's the editor of Schlock Webzine and Lovecraftiana magazine, Mr. Gavin Chappell. Hello, matey. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm all right. I'm a lot better than I was last time I saw you.
Yeah. Although you haven't got the sort of the doped up smile like last time.
No. That's a shame, really. But I do miss that part. But other than that, it's very painful.
Excellent. Yeah, well, you're no stranger to this kind of endeavor, because my first exposure to your work was your Sinbad versus the Great Old Ones.
Yeah.
Which is just brilliant. So as soon as I was thinking of this, it's like, I've got to get Gavin involved.
Well, oddly enough, 25 years ago, I actually wrote a story set in what was basically Doggerland. I think I was still at uni at that point. But I didn't call it Doggerland, but it had an island rising from the North Sea, and there was a kind of Celtic paradise. And the Navy got involved, and some kids who'd stolen a yacht got involved, and it was all a bit crazy. I've trod these muddy paths before. Now, I would like to say that my story features peaceful prehistoric vegans gathering nuts and berries and napping their flints for entirely peaceful reasons. But I'd be lying.
Yes. Indeed, sir. Indeed. Yes. So if you'd like to introduce your story and give us a bit of a reading, mate, that would be brilliant.
Okay, so my story is about a character. I'm afraid I cannot claim credit for Crom Yar. He was actually invented by a writer from about 100 years ago called H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know what happened to him. But in The Shadow Out of Time, one of the various people who has been mentally abducted by the great race of Yith is Crom Yar, who is said to be a Cimmerian chieftain from 15,000 BC. Now, Cimmerian, that's obviously a reference to Robert E. Howard's Conan series. Conan is a Cimmerian, or Cimmerian, or Cimmerian, or however you want to pronounce it. I say Cimmerian. Do you want to fight? Well, I don't. Anyway, so Crom Yar is a Cimmerian. What I see these Cimmerians are as is a kind of precursor to the Conan tribe. And basically, if you look at the maps of the Hyborian Age, the place where Cimmeria is shown to be basically Doggerland and the surrounding area. But basically, Doggerland and Cimmeria are one and the same. So I've interpreted Crom Yar, this Cimmerian chieftain from 15,000 BC, as somebody who's living in Doggerland. So that's the beginnings of my story, which is called Crom Yar and the City of False Seeming. Chapter 1, The Ambush. Doggerland, 15,002 BC, April the 12th, 8 o'clock a.m. Crom Yar flung himself back to dodge the thrust of a flint-tipped spear. His own weapon, forged from the fallen star, glimmered dully in the watery sunlight as he swung an overhand blow at his skin-clad warrior opponent. With a splintering crunch, he split the attacker's skull to his teeth, and a welter of blood and brains flooded out. The man dropped to the boggy earth, where the pink paste of his unseated brains oozed into the mud. Wheeling, Crom Yar caught sight of Shugthrod, who had led them into these swamps in search of the raiders. He was sprinting away from the fierce struggle, where Crom Yar's tribal warriors fought against the yelling men of the north. Crom Yar's colourless eyes narrowed. He had been a fool to let Shugthrod lead him into peril. He snatched up the spear of the man dying at his feet, turned, and used the impetus to send it whizzing through the wet air. He cursed, invoking the toad god, as the spear sank into the mud on the spot Shugthrod had just quit. Frightened by this unexpected attack, Shugthrod put on a sudden burst of speed, vanishing into a thicket of blackthorn, its white blossom an incongruously cheery sight. Crom Yar would have followed, but his men were hard pressed. 7 already lay in the mud, brain pans crushed by the flint axes of the men of the north, or with the blue snakes of their guts slithering from their spear-ripped bellies. 2 men of the tribe were fighting back to back, but even as Crom Yar watched, one fell to a Northman's savage axe blow. The last, a sinewy warrior with a mane of hair as black as jet, who wielded a feathered spear that was bloody along the haft, was now surrounded by 4 men of the north. Elsewhere, among the thickets, Crom Yar's folk could be heard fighting for their lives, but this combat was closest. He struck the Northmen like a bolt of lightning, his sorcerous weapon whirring like a woodcock, faster than an arrow from a bow. 2 warriors fell back, clutching at scarlet-spouting throats. At once the numbers were equal, 2 men of the north confronted by 2 men of the tribe. Crom Yar knew the warrior who clutched at a spear-gored side. Sath was a cousin of his, younger by several winters. "Crom Yar," he called out, leaning wearily on his spear haft. "By the toad, we will die together." Crom Yar gave a bark of laughter. "I shall not die this day, kinsman," he assured him, "nor will any of my tribesfolk." But he boasted in vain. A reckless Northman tried to hamstring him, but without seeming effort, Crom Yar's wizard blade slid through the greasy, wattled neck of the hairy man, biting into his spinal column. As he did so, the last of the Northmen lunged at Sath, piercing his belly with a spear so that it stood out a handspan's length from the man's back. Looking up, Crom Yar snarled to see Sath clutching at the weapon that pierced him. All around him, Crom Yar's men were falling to the axes and spears of the Northman raiding party. 2 more Northmen, blood staining their beards crimson, ran towards them. Not heeding them, Crom Yar swung his glittering blade at the victorious Northman, slicing into his ribcage with a wet thud. Out of the corner of his eye, Crom Yar caught movement, but before he could react, something exploded in his mind as a stone axe struck him on the side of the head. That instant of awareness had been enough for Crom Yar to begin to move, so he escaped a split skull. But the resultant blow was enough to knock the wits from him. He fell to the mud like a dead man and knew nothing for a long time. It was the full-throated croaking of ravens that awoke him. He lay full length at the foot of a blackthorn bush, face sticky with blood from a scalp wound. For a space, he lay on his side, still dazed, gathering his scattered wits. The rank smell of spilt blood hung dankly in the wet air. Crom Yar knew it well, had known it since he was a boy, when he went with his father on his first hunts, his first raids. Blood and death had been constant companions for this chieftain of the tribe. Still the ravens croaked. He could hear them squabbling over the fallen. One landed on his own unmoving form, drawn by the smell of blood. Crom Yar summoned up all his reserves of strength to roll over, flailing ineffectually at the raven as it flew off, flapping low to the ground as it croaked imprecations. He sat up, head spinning, and a chiding flock of black birds flew up immediately to circle overhead. Nearby lay the bloody length of his sorcerer's weapon. A sword was what it had been called by the wizard who had forged it. He had dreamed of such weaponry. The men of old had wielded its like before the western island vanished beneath the waves. Why had not the men of the north taken it as booty? Next to it lay a stiffened corpse, pecked at mercilessly by the ravens who now settled on the bushes, watching disapprovingly. On his hands and knees, Crom Yar crawled forwards through the mud. He uttered a wolf bark of laughter. The fingers of the man's right hand lay in a sticky pool of blood. They had been neatly sliced off when, Cromyar guessed, the would-be thief had seized his sword by the blade. His credulous comrades had left him here to bleed to death, perhaps believing that he had angered the gods by his presumption. The blade had descended to the earth in a storm, flung down by the sky god in his wrath. Only Cromyar himself knew how to wield it. With the sword's aid, he helped himself to his feet. Ravens croaked their displeasure, watching him beadily from the bushes. Unsteady as a newborn fawn, Cromyar gazed around. Other than the man who had tried to take the sword of star metal, no bodies were to be seen but those of the tribe. The raiders had borne away their own kind for interment within the ice-cold caves they called home. He saw a clear trail leading northwards through the undergrowth, but they had left the dead of Cromyar's tribe for the Raven. Cromyar remembered Shugthrod fleeing the fight. He had led them into this narrows, claiming it would be a faster route to the caves of the Northmen. Shugthrod had led him into this ambush, and he had not been slow in his flight. Now Cromyar knew the man for a traitor. Shugthrod came from a clan whose territory lay upon the margins of Northman country. Often enough had he protested his hatred for the men of the north around the council fires, but it had all been a sham, it seemed. Somehow, and at some point, he had been suborned by the tribe's traditional enemies. Alone as he was, even with the aid of his sorcerer's sword, he stood no chance of gaining vengeance on the Northman. That pleasure must be deferred until he returned to the lands of the tribe and mustered more warriors. But in the meantime, he would slake his thirst for revenge by hunting down the treacherous Shugthrod. And if you want to read the rest of that story or any of the other stories that you have heard today, just buy that book and hopefully Amazon will deliver it as soon as possible.
At some point, yeah. Excellent as always, mate. Yeah, well done. Brilliant. I've got to point out, whirring like a woodcock. I love that. There's something about it. It's just like, yeah, I like that. That's a good one. That's a good one, that. Yeah.
I think I stole it from Henry Treese or Rosemary Sutcliffe or one of those historical writers.
Right, yeah. It's a great line. Yeah, I think Eric sums up your story quite perfectly here. Brutal. Yeah. He also points out that there's a true Clark Ashton Smith feel to your story, right. which is excellent because that's basically what I was hoping would happen. And it's interesting how many people included like Sarthogua and things like that. I think everybody I was reading up on my character, who's obviously not my character, Cromyar, and he has been mentioned in one or two other mythos tales. And there's one, I forget where it was, but according to some wiki online, he's said to have been a worshipper of Sarthogua. So I thought that's interesting. Nice. But the other interesting thing about him is he has been, in the minds of the great race of Yith. So unlike the rest of his prehistoric chums, he knows a bit more about the universe. Yeah, and that's possibly why he wields his sword of star metal. Yeah, it's interesting because I picked up on that and included that later on in mine because I was basically I put most of the stories into a sort of vague chronology, and mine is sort of the dying days, basically my attempt to sort of tie it all up. So yeah, that was something I picked up on. It was like, oh right, yeah, that's going in. So my job was to basically cherry pick little bits out of everybody's stories to sort of tie them together. So yeah, I thought you did a great job on that. It was a great story. Right, matey, I'll bring you back on in just a bit. Yeah, we'll be having the usual Q&A in just a moment. So yeah, if you have any questions for the authors and myself, get them down in the comments section. Now, as I just mentioned, my story was basically to wrap up the overall arc of Doggerland, this doomed land. So basically it was my job to kill it. Which I enjoyed immensely. It's really great fun, like writing doom. It's really good fun. So yeah, my story's called Holding Back the Flood, and it starts off that tribes have been dying, disappearing, being taken out of the equation. And there's a hunting party led by the headman of this village. And he's trying to give aid to other people and try and find out what's been going on. And My main character is his son, Cal, who's a headstrong pain in the arse of a man, basically. And his brother Afon, who's a bit of a yes man, and their friend Neva, who's basically a chump. Cal ends up having an argument with his dad, and they go off to try and find, because he's looking for his betrothed, Jerl, Cal is. So they go off to try and find some tracks. So I'm going to pick up the story just a little way in, when they've gone off to, basically he's gone off sulking to try and look for some tracks because his dad's punched him one, So, and that's pretty much where the story picks up. It's called Holding Back the Flood. Climbing out of the water, Neva moved to Cal's position. He didn't need to ask what the problem was. He could see for himself. Spitting a curse under his breath and absent-mindedly fiddling with the charm hung around his neck, he gazed out to sea. The waves rolled in a deliberate fashion towards the headland. With each susurrant impact, the water crept ever so slightly forward, as though devouring the earth inch by inch, bite by bite. How many cunning women still live, do you think? Neva's normally jocular expression had been dragged downward by the gravity of the situation. I know not, my friend. They've been eliminating them one by one. Ours and that old hermit that lives out near the Deadlands remain. Aside from them, not many, I fear. Cal trailed off, looking across the land to the other side of the river. Neva sighed, his muscular chest sagging. I wonder why the old hermit has been left untouched. After all, he has the cunning, and is only a stone's throw from the Deadlands. I would have thought he'd be first to go. Cal scratched the fluff on his chin thoughtfully. Perhaps he's working with them, or his cunning simply poses no threat. Could be. Neither man had heard Afon approach. He was a little ways off, scouring the weeds and shrubs that sat back from the riverbank up a steep incline. To the surprise of Cal and Neva, he let out a sharp whistle that shook them out of their reverie. The two men turned and gave questioning gestures. Afon pointed his spear through the thicket and motioned them to follow. He had picked up the trail of something. Ascending the acclivitous land to Afon's position, Cal and Neva crouched low at his side and followed the tip of his spear with his eyes. The bush had been split in two by the passage of some kind of bulk. What could have caused this? Cal whispered. I know not. Look how the stem has broken off of the root. This is a hardy shrub that would have taken much force. A body being dragged? Possibly. Though it would have had to have been a giant of a man to have caused this. Neva looked at the elder of the siblings and raised an eyebrow. So what are you saying? I don't know, but I don't like it. There's nothing natural about any of this. We should go and fetch some more men. I have a bad feeling. Cal let out a snort of derision, broke ranks, and set off on the newly formed trail. Neva looked at Afon and shrugged before following. Resisting the urge to bash in his brother's skull with a nearby lump of chalk dislodged from the mud-sodden bank, Afon cursed under his breath, then reluctantly followed. A path around a metre in width had been gouged through the foliage. The thick tangle of heather, bindweed, and ground elder had almost been erased, shorn down to the root by the unknown force. Only a few plants stubbornly clung on to life. It continued in a snaking fashion along the ridge for a short distance before plunging sharply down into the salt marshes. The three men scrambled down the bank and looked at the corridor that had been carved through the head-high reeds and stinging nettles. Even Cal was struck by how unnatural it all was. Again, Afon stepped in front of the others and motioned for them to return to the bank. His eyes were wide with nagging dread and his lips clenched into a thin line. He didn't dare speak, though he didn't know why. There was just something hanging in the air that had a stranglehold on his larynx. Cal moved forward until he was almost chest to chest with his sibling and opened his mouth to speak, but was silenced by a heavy rustle and the sound of dragging waters off to their right. The three men froze, drawing weapons and looking in the direction of the disturbance. A few feet away, The tops of the vegetation started to dance, sending a startled squadron of brightly coloured damselflies into the sky. Cal crouched low and readied his spear. The others drew axes, as the presence continued to shamble towards them. The sound of the water and the drone of insects had been joined by a noise far more unnerving, a kind of wheezing gurgle, punctuated by croaking groans. As it drew nearer, the trio of warriors prepared to engage. Jittery from the rising tension of the ponderous slop and slurp of the footsteps, Cal jumped to meet the threat as it broke cover, but was knocked off balance by Athon and dug his spear into nothing but air. "Hold, you fool!" Athon bellowed. Before them was a man caked from head to toe in blood and filth. He was clutching a gaping wound in his side. It looked like something had taken a bite out of him. The figure took one more step, then fell face first into the water at their feet. "Quick, help him!" Neva sheathed his axe and dropped to his knees, turning the man over and raising his head from the water. "Cal, help me, put pressure on his wound." Cal hesitated. "Out of the way!" Athon shouldered him aside, squatted down and took a look at the man's wound. His eyes met Neva's questioning gaze. He shook his head sadly. "I know this man," Cal said, after finally regaining his composure. "He's one of the peddlers from the market. Jill used to get provisions from him." "What's his name?" Neva slapped the man's cheeks in an effort to rouse him back to consciousness. "I'm not sure." "Think, damn it!" Cal flinched as though he'd been slapped again. Neva rarely raised his voice, so when he did, it was startling to say the least. "I think it's Dermuid." "Dermuid, can you hear me? Dermuid?" Neva's raised voice, accompanied by a final wet slap, roused the fallen man from his slumber. "That's it, you're safe now. What happened here?" The man, Dermuid, opened his mouth, but the only thing that came forth was a choked gobbet of blood and saliva. Athon used a torn strip of animal hide to wipe his lips, then held his water skin to them. After the trickle of cool river water had cleared his throat, Dermuid tried again. "Men with antler headdresses came. It was slaughter. We had no chance. They came without warning." Dermuid's rasping whisper gave way to a series of coughs and splutters that sent more blood dribbling down his chin, matting his orange beard. "What of Jill? Does she live?" Cal loomed over Dermuid, making him flinch and struggle for breath. "Speak!" Athon growled low in the back of his throat, rose and shoved Cal back. When he went to move back closer, Athon levelled a finger caked in the man's blood to Cal's chest and shook his head. Righty-ho, if you want to know what's been going on here and what's happened to this poor chap, like Gavin said, you'll have to grab a hold of a copy of the book. Righty-ho, I'm going to bring on the guests and we'll have a bit of a chat and get some questions down in the comments if you want. Okay, here's Mr. Rob Poyton, Mr. Chris McAuley, and Mr. Gavin Chappell. Excellent work, lads. And yeah, Chris Murray Hultman just says, "Isn't that the title of a wet, wet, wet song?" What? What, wet slap? Or whirring like a woodcock?
Just sounds like a typical night out for you, mate. This is not, no?
It's got a certain meter to it, isn't it? Whirring like a woodcock, streaming like a pigeon. I don't know. You know.
That could be the first hit for Men in Tweed, couldn't it? The new lounge band. Yeah.
Only Holding Back the Flood is the wet song.
Oh, right. Is it? I couldn't tell you, mate. Funnily enough, I'm not a wet fan.
Yes, Holding Back the Flood. Brilliant.
Excellent, then. Right, as Rob said, he was already familiar with Doggerland. But I want to ask a question about how much research went into your stories, because I spent a ridiculous amount of time putting the briefing packet together, because as we mentioned, like Doggerland, it's not that much really not known. So I ended up joining academia.eu and downloading all the PDFs I possibly could about Doggerland, sticking them in a zip file and shoving them in your direction. So, yeah, how much did you have to do then, Rob?
Well, not very much, thanks to wonderful information pack. And I've done a little bit before, as we spoke about before, but I think really the main thing for me was getting a sense of the technology level and anything we knew about the structure of society, the tribal structure, or were they nomads or hunter-gatherers or that kind of thing. So really with those things in place, then that gives you a structure to sort of build on, really.
Yeah, definitely. Chris?
Yeah, your pack was great, mate. I did a little bit of YouTubing.
Nice.
So go on the YouTube and have a look. Whenever I was discussing it with Claudia, she's very much into like alternative history. So it really interested her, and she loves historical fiction. So I think she went away and had a look at some stuff as well. The fact that this thing just disappears and nobody knows what's happened, I mean, that's a brilliant setup for any story, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that was basically the whole gist of it. Like, because Chris Mary Hultman had just watched the documentary, and some other people had commented, like on the book posts about they'd just seen a documentary. It was probably the same one. I think one came out last year at some point about it. I mean, I saw a Time Team special on it like about 5 years ago. Or something.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so I think that's basically the gist of it, wasn't it? It was kind of like, well, it's a mysterious place, so it's almost a blank slate, which is a bonus to authors, isn't it? It's kind of like, here's a thing, here's some doom, have at it.
Yeah.
So, Gavin, how much did you do?
I don't know if you're familiar with the Slain stories from 2000 AD.
Yeah.
But they are, there's the Ragnarok, which is looming over Slane's Land of the Young, and that is basically Doggerland and it's drowning. And it wasn't just Doggerland, because there were all the way around Britain, there was land where there is now sea. So there was a whole land mass that isn't there anymore due to the Great Cataclysm. I can't pronounce is it the Storiga Slide?
Storiga Slide, I think is how you pronounced it. I'm not entirely sure. I'm glad you went there first.
I mean, I'm really into prehistoric stuff, generally speaking. I love Edgar Rice Burroughs' Caveman and Dinosaur stuff, but I also love Henry Treece and all that kind of prehistoric, slightly more historical kind of prehistoric stuff. To be honest, I didn't have to do very much research for this one or for the Vikings one, because I'm equally into the Vikings. It was actually the modern day one where I was ably helped in my research by a book.
Bless you, sir. Bless you.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that on my shelf as well.
Yeah, it's modern day where I have to do the research.
Well, you have to be more accurate in modern day, didn't you? Because 20 years makes all the difference. Whereas
I
20 years
I set mine in 1990, so that's far back enough into prehistory to be okay.
Well, I tend to set most of my stuff in the sort of end of the 80s, early 90s, basically because it gets rid of mobile phones. Because they're such a pain in the ass for plots, aren't they? It's like, you're stranded somewhere, get your phone out, go on Google Maps.
But then you can't get the signal because of the cosmic forces at play.
Indeed.
Plays havoc with your signal.
Indeed. Well, that's why I set most of my stuff in Cornwall, because you just can't get a signal in Cornwall. So.
But I really love that Gavin brought in Cromyar and that Lovecraft connection as well, because that's the character, or that's the mention that ties in the Hyborian age with Lovecraft's universe, and then we get those connections between Bram McMahon and Cole and Conan and the mythos. It all becomes one shared universe then, which I really like.
Yeah.
And did you notice my reference to a western land that has sunk beneath the waves?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like you say, the Great Cataclysm.
Indeed.
It was a great cataclysm.
It was a great. As opposed to the sort of middling cataclysm.
Yeah.
Not so
mediocre cataclysm. There you go. Nice. Yeah, that brings us quite neatly to a question we hear from Josiah. He's another anthology he was bummed to have missed. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, pal. Has anyone thought of doing the same for Japan? There's also evidence that it was not connected to the greater continent, Beringer, Old Guinea, and all that. So that's a good question, actually. What other areas would you like to explore? The doomed lands, that kind of thing.
Australia and Indonesia and that sort of area, they were all united at one point in the same sort of period, and they had all sorts of wonderful giant lizards and all that kind of thing. I wrote a story set in that area and referred to it as Lemuria, because obviously it was Lemuria, because also it's vanished beneath the waves. So that's quite a good one.
Nice. Chris?
Sorry.
No, carry on, Rob. Go on.
I don't know, really. It's not something I've actually thought about much. Doomed lands always reminds me of some like World War One type scenario. A land that's kind of doomed to war and bloodshed and all of that sort of stuff. But if it comes to like lands sunk beneath the sea, the only one I really know of is Atlantis, which might be interesting,
Yeah. Again, though, it ties nicely into the Clark Ashton Smith, doesn't it? His whole Poseidonis cycle and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Go on, Rob.
And it was something we were talking about the other day with the Graham Hancock series that was on Netflix, I think, at the moment. Any scientific thought or whatever aside, this idea that Malta used to be connected in with the mainland, and I think Bermuda was connected to Florida, all these land masses that have disappeared. Whatever you think about his theories, they're great ideas for writers and potential settings, I think. It seems to be, it's like a universal theory, it seems, this flood thing, universal myth.
I remember reading Fingerprints of the Gods around about the same time I was first writing stories in general, still at uni. But I remember finding that really compelling, because it was like, wow, this is exactly the same kind of thing that you get in Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard and all that kind of thing. Maybe it's true. And then I thought, maybe not.
But maybe.
Who knows?
We've got a very important question just popped up on the feed here from Russell Smeaton.
Hey, Russell.
Very, very important and relevant question. What is in Rob's massive jug he is hiding behind the curtain?
What is in it? Well, I'm afraid to say it's just water, but the jug itself, I don't know if you can see, this is Frazetta's death deal. That was nice. I think it was a birthday present from my wife. I'm a big Frazetta fan. So, but yeah, it's not got mead or ale or red wine or anything like that in it. I'm afraid it's just water.
Yeah, Eric says that he's currently watching the Graham Hancock series right now. Yeah, it is one of those things, isn't it? That it is just full of these ideas. It's like, again, like Time Team. Again, whatever you think about the show or their practices or anything like that, they do have some incredibly interesting subjects that would be great to explore. So, I mean, I spend a lot of time watching like dodgy documentaries on YouTube about random subjects just to give me story ideas,
I do have a half-written story somewhere. I think it was one of those that I was going to use for my Remnants book, but never got in it. And it's a sort of Time Team dig out in the fens where they unearth the bones of a very large hound.
Nice.
But I never really got around to finishing it, but maybe one day.
Oh, there's definite mileage there, isn't there? Oh, there's all that black shuck stuff in around there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Russell says nice jugs. And Chris says that the History Channel is best for shoddy docs. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Shoddy docs. I like that. That's a good expression.
Docs, yeah, it's a good
shoddy
one.
Docs.
Cool. Yeah. So if you have any more questions, get them in the comments. But just before we start wrapping up, I'd just like to say, yeah, book 2 will be obviously The Whisperer in Valhalla, which is going to be set, obviously, with the old Vikings. And Gavin's already well ahead. He's already written.
I have slightly rewritten that one, by the way, only slightly, but to get it to fit in with my third story. So I'll be sending you that as soon as you are accepting submissions.
Nice, excellent. Yeah. So, Rob, have you ever had any thoughts about that yet? Where are you going to go with
not
it?
a great deal. No, funnily enough, I've got more thoughts about the third one, which is going to be sort of modern day, right? I've got some things I can tie in. But I did set something up in the first story, the Temple of the Toad, that is going to pop back up again, I think. So So it relates to the discovery of quite a well-known mythos book, which is kind of is revealed at the end of the story. So I think that'll be my theme through the 3.
Nice. Yeah, because that was what I plucked out of yours to include in the sort of wrap-up bits, was your pseudo tome, let's call it.
Yes.
Yeah. Thought that was a really nice touch, So, Chris, are you going to be joining us on?
Claudia and I'll be joining you. Claudia has Viking experience. She's voiced Vikings in video games, and I think she was in some animated film as well. She's done far too much. I can't keep up. So she's going to be leading what the actual story is. She's got a very interesting idea about a shield maiden, and obviously it's going to be full of like blood and guts and action and the usual stuff that I seem to gravitate towards. But so we're looking at that in a minute. Should be interesting, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I did what Rob, I sort of set mine up in that one. I've sort of left the seeds at the end of it that I'm just going to go with that. It's going to kind of, I've got it in my head. I never really plot or plan, but I know kind of where I'm going with them. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We'll be getting started on that in the new year. They'll make sure that people know about it. And like I say, there will be 3 books. And I think we're going to be calling the 3rd one The Haunter of the Isles, to keep the Lovecraftian theme. So it says Shadow Over Doggerland, A Whisperer in Valhalla, and The Haunter of the Isles. Yeah. So, thank you guys for joining me this evening, and thank you for taking part in the book. Like I said, I had tremendous fun putting it together. It was one of those editing jobs that wasn't really like work. I just sort of put them all in a file and just sort of read it, and this was just like, it's great. Yeah. Blood, guts, and shoggoths. I mean, what else do you need,
And toads.
Plenty of toads, isn't there? Yeah.
Ribbit.
Yeah.
Careful, Gavin! You'll give the game away that we're all avatars of Sarthogua, and we're just trying to recruit new workers.
I've always thought that if I was going to be a cultist, that he would be my guy, Sarthogua. I like the whole gluttony and laziness thing. It seems to suit me.
It seems to be the only one you can have a chat with, isn't it? Because in a lot of the stories, people actually have a chat with him,
Yeah, like the 7 Gaiuses. Yeah. He turns up and has a chat, and he's just like, I can't really be bothered to eat you. I'll send you to that like that.
I've started working on a cyberpunk series. Actually, the first of them's out in shotgun, and it's kind of like it's sort of like I see a lot of the tech side. That's quite Lovecraftian as well. Yeah, essentially it's sort of a bit like that, where it's like so I get really when I started working on the Terminator stuff. That's what when I get to the head of Skynet. That's what I saw Skynet as being, like one of the great ones. That whole thing. It's really we're so small in comparison to this thing, this collective intelligence. Which actually just destroys the world. So I find like techno Lovecraftian stuff to be quite interesting at the minute. So that's a wee plug for Slot magazine there. So there you go. Go and read the latest issue.
Free from slot.co.uk.
So there you go. Excellent. Yeah, and like the Shadow Over Doggerland is out now. And the link is there. There's also a link you can click underneath the video and in the description of the video if you're watching on YouTube. Okay, thanks, guys, for joining me today. And thank you all at home for tuning in and for your questions and your interactions. It's always great when people actually comment, because I've done some of these before when nobody does, and it's all a bit like I'm on a mad scramble to get some like content, So, thanks, man. And thanks, everybody, for joining in. And next week, I will be hosting another one of these live videos for a book, The Private Vault of Aleister Crowley, which has just come out from Black Ink Fiction and contains my Lovecraftian novelette, Eugene Angove and the Staff of Nefrenkar. So just before we go, what have you got in the pipeline at the minute, Rob? What are you working on?
I'm just putting the finishing touches to the 7th volume, I think, in my Sword and Sorcery series, Wolf Who Would Be King, and this is Lork's Years as a Pirate. So it's rather than a full novel this time, it's a collection of shorter stories, all kind of interlinked. So lots of blood and guts on the high seas.
Awesome. Chris, I imagine you've got about 18 different projects on the go, haven't you?
At the minute, a really cool Doctor Who project.
Nice.
That is going to feature Terry Malloy.
Davros himself. Excellent. The definitive Davros, in my opinion.
He's brilliant. Yeah, he's brilliant. He's a great guy as well. Really nice guy.
Yeah. Cool. Gavin?
Right at the moment, I am working on the next edition of Lovecraftiana, which is going to be a celebration of 100 years of weird fiction, because it'll be out next year, and that'll be the centenary of Weird Tales.
Oh, awesome.
Excellent.
That's the main
Rob,
thing.
we'll have to do an Innsmouth Book Club special on that.
Yes.
Well, I was actually thinking of asking you if you do a book launch for it.
Oh, yes.
Because you are the man who can.
There you go. Yeah, and I'd be very happy to do that. Yeah, excellent. Okay, yes. So thank you all, and thank you at home, and we will see you all soon. Okay, goodbye. Oh, what a break.
Hey.
See you.